Welcome to Science Matters Colorado, the podcast that dives deep into the environmental issues affecting our beautiful state. Each episode, I talk with experts to help you better understand the environmental challenges we face and celebrate the natural wonders we strive to protect. Today, we're focusing on algal blooms, an issue that has recently caught the attention of the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, or the CDPHE. These blooms are most common in summer, spurred by high temperatures and abundant sunlight, and they pose a growing concern for water quality, and public health. In this episode, I sit down with Sarah Erickson, a water quality specialist from the CDPHE. We'll discuss the causes and impacts of toxic algae, how these blooms are monitored, and the steps you can take to protect yourself and help reduce their spread. Though algal blooms are most prevalent in the summer months, the nutrients that fuel them, compounds like nitrogen and phosphorus, are found year-round in many household products. Sarah also shares CDPHE resources for checking water quality before heading out and reporting suspected blooms. You can find links to these resources in the show notes. Welcome, Sarah Erickson. So Sarah is a scientist with the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, and she is a water quality specialist. Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about your background and your expertise in this subject matter?
Of course. Thanks for having me, Alex. I have a master's degree in environmental policy and management from the University of Denver. I did work in fisheries science and water quality in Florida for about 10 years before I moved back home to Colorado, and I started working for CDPHE in 2019.
Great. So the topic today is on algal blooms. Can you tell us a little bit about algal blooms? Why are those becoming more prevalent here in Colorado and specifically on the Front Range?
So toxic algae, a lot of people refer to it as blue-green algae. That's a term you'll hear thrown around a lot. Technically, they're a special type of bacteria called cyanobacteria. They do occur naturally all over the globe, including Colorado. They tend to become a problem when they multiply rapidly. It results in a dense concentration or a bloom, and these blooms can become harmful to people and pets when they start producing those toxins. One thing to note is not all of them produce toxins, so you can't really tell without testing it.
Does that mean that when you see this sort of pea soup looking formation, it could be toxic or it could be not, but best practice is just to steer clear for both humans and pets?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. You can't tell just by looking at it if it is producing toxins. So if you see some of those telltale signs, it looks like thick pea soup, or it looks like somebody spilled paint on the surface of the water. It can be different colors like turquoise, bright green, red, all kinds of interesting colors. That's the point when you want to think about staying out of there. We give people a simple phrase to remember: when in doubt, stay out.
Are there any bodies of fresh water that recently have had algal blooms that you've advised the public to steer clear of?
We do have a toxic algae dashboard, so we saw quite a few blooms this summer. We see a lot of them along the Front Range. Part of that is just because that's where people are, so we tend to notice them a lot more. But they can occur all over the state. And
how do those blooms affect the fish and perhaps other wildlife in that area?
With fish, the primary effect that we see is these bacteria, they will use up dissolved oxygen in the overnight hours, so that lowers the oxygen levels in the water. And obviously fish need oxygen from the water to breathe, so that's when we see some overnight fish kills. And then other wildlife, they can be affected by the toxins too.
So it's not some sort of like chemical toxin that's killing the fish. It's a sort of hypoxia that is suffocating them, I guess. Is that right?
Yeah, with the fish, it's typically the hypoxic conditions.
So the cyanobacteria, that is a toxic bacteria that they're producing. And that's the part that is harmful to humans, pets, and other wildlife. But that's not necessarily what is killing the fish. Is that a correct framing?
Yeah, that's correct. There's still a lot of research going on about toxin effects on fish. So we don't know everything yet, but that acute low dissolved oxygen is typically what will kill the fish.
Is this impacting the water in other ways? Does it impact drinking water, or are there measures that are taken to improve the treatment processes for drinking water?
For drinking water, the most common complaint that happens when you see these blooms are taste and odor complaints. Taste and odor don't necessarily have harmful health impacts on people, but nobody wants to drink water that tastes and smells bad. So that's the most common complaint, and they can last for a while. In addition to that, the toxic algae can create a public health risk when they do produce those toxins. Conventional water treatment, including coagulation, sedimentation, filtration, and chlorination, can generally remove toxic algae and low levels of toxin from the source waters. Also, activated carbon is an effective treatment option for removing the toxins. And then during an algae bloom, water utilities will optimize their treatment operations to remove cyanobacteria and toxins. Removing toxins safely and cost effectively can certainly be a challenge for the treatment facilities.
Okay, so after those treatment processes, some of which are specifically adapted to treat the algae blooms, there might be some lingering odor or taste difference, but that shouldn't be a concern or raise eyebrows for people drinking that water that has been treated. So like tap water, for example.
Yes.
Gotcha. So how does the CDPHE, and this is a big question, so if you want to focus on any like specific example, how do you monitor and track these blooms?
We have been tracking blooms since 2019. Every summer, our program does routine monitoring. We usually monitor around 20 lakes and reservoirs. We also partner really closely with Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and they monitor state parks and select wildlife areas. Also, anyone else can report blooms to us, cities, counties, whoever, but it's not required that people report blooms to us, but we do encourage it.
That's great. If people do want to report a bloom, what's the best way to do that?
For the general public, we do have a tox call line that people can report blooms to. For water body managers who are actually in charge of lakes and reservoirs, there is a form on our toxic algae dashboard that they can fill out, and that comes to us, and then we can offer them guidance and we can add it to our state tracking map. So some different resources for people there.
Great. And I can link that form in the show notes along with the report line. I personally became interested in this just seeing closures for certain bodies of fresh water. I think maybe the first one I came across was Sloan's Lake. Could be wrong about that, so you can let me know. And I'm curious, is there a certain threshold for issuing a health advisory or for closing because of an algal bloom? And also, is there any differentiation between you can't, we have an algal bloom, it's severe enough that you can't swim, but it's still okay to maybe take a paddleboard out? Or, what are those thresholds for those closures?
Yeah, so we have some different recommendations that we suggest that managing agencies use. So if there's a visible bloom and or low levels of toxins that are below the threshold, we recommend that caution signs be posted. So some activities may still be permitted, just not direct water contact. We recommend that warning signs be posted when the toxin level is above the advisory threshold. And Colorado has toxin advisory levels for 4 different types of toxins.
Okay. And that closure would impact any water activities, any water recreation. Is that right?
Yes, it's really up to the managing agency what they want to do. We would typically recommend that they close swim beaches, anything that involves direct contact dog beaches, areas like that.
So I'm curious, how did you become focused on this issue? I know you said you were in Florida and you're a specialist for in Florida for around a decade. What coming out here made you interested in this particular area?
As I mentioned before, we started monitoring these blooms in 2019. That was when the state actually received funding to start looking at this, which funded my position, and that's when I was hired. So that's when I really became involved in the toxic algae blooms and monitoring and just learning all the information I can. There's a lot of research that goes on, so just keeping up with all of the latest science on it. There's a lot of information out there.
Right. I mean, 5 years, that's a remarkably new field of study. What has the response from the public been like? Is this a major concern, or are people able to adapt pretty well to this?
We get quite a few inquiries from the public, mainly concerning human health, concerns about pet safety. We just get a lot of general questions about that and what people should look for. As I said before, these blooms oftentimes don't look or smell very good, so there are a lot of concerns with the aesthetic effects of these blooms. And we also get a lot of questions about whether a particular water body has been tested for toxins. So those are kind of the main questions that we get from people. We also get questions from water body managers who might be experiencing a bloom for the first time and they're not quite sure what to do. So we're here to offer guidance to them and kind of help them through that.
A lot of this research is pretty new, and the guidance is, in response to safety measures. How do we effectively respond? How do we make sure we're treating the water so we still have safe drinking water? How about on the front end of this issue? I think the elephant in the room is how climate change exacerbates this issue, precursors that are causing these blooms. Does the CDPHE play a role in trying to limit contributors to the prevalence of these blooms?
Certainly, excess nutrients are a contributing factor to these blooms. Limiting nutrient discharges is one thing that we can do to help. Climate change is a difficult thing to deal with. We know that warm temperatures exacerbate these blooms, so it stands to reason as we see warmer and warmer temperatures, we'll probably see more blooms.
And Colorado is known for its 300 days of sun a year, so it's a lovely thing to have, but also is lovely for the algae as well. Is there steps that people can take to prevent that runoff, not using certain fertilizers or ammonia nitrates that would prevent these blooms?
Yeah, so nitrogen and phosphorus are definitely two of the main characters that the toxic algae likes to eat. We encourage people to fertilize responsibly, follow the directions on the package, don't over-fertilize. Another simple thing that people can do to reduce the amount of nutrients that are getting into our waterways is pick up after your pets. Pet waste contains nitrogen and phosphorus, so that's another simple way that people can help. Another thing is we're going into winter that a lot of people don't think about is reducing the use of de-icers. We encourage people to use de-icers that don't contain urea. We also recommend that people shovel before the ice forms just to help reduce the use of those de-icers because they do also contain these compounds that get into our waterways, and come summertime, they help fuel those blooms.
Yes, I just want to reiterate, please, everyone pick up after your pets. That's very appreciated. So kind of branching off into a different subject, I know that this is really new. You said that this really just started in 2019 in terms of having this department focus on this issue in Colorado. Do we have any success stories of effective management of this issue in Colorado, or maybe other places that we can draw from?
So we don't manage any lakes directly. So CDPHE doesn't have any direct experience with effective algae bloom success stories. I've heard some anecdotes from other local people and also from around the nation. Some of the things that people use are ultrasound, which can disrupt the buoyancy of the cyanobacteria cells so they can't reach the sunlight. Barley straw bales in other areas of the country, people have seen success placing those. They help to inhibit the growth of cyanobacteria. And also phosphorus binding compounds are something that are pretty commonly used. It binds phosphorus, as it says in the name, and that limits the phosphorus availability to cyanobacteria, so it essentially helps to starve them out. But of course, that doesn't address the root cause of nutrients coming into the lake.
That's fascinating. I think I've heard of the phosphorus binding compounds. How are these each applied? Like the straw bales, for instance, where exactly does that fit into the picture? Is it something that like kind of filters the runoff, or where exactly does that get applied?
The barley straw bales, it's recommended that they're placed along the shoreline zone about 1 to 2 months prior to the expected bloom, and they help to inhibit the growth. And I'd have to look up the science behind that. I'm not an expert on that, but I have heard success stories of doing that.
Was that anywhere in Colorado that's being applied?
I know off the top of my head, the other stories I've heard have generally been out east. And it usually needs to be a smaller lake or reservoir because you need to use a lot of barley straw bales, so they're probably not feasible for very large lakes and reservoirs.
And for the ultrasounds, I don't know the correct terminology. Are you hitting the blooms directly with the ultrasound?
I'm not an expert on the exact mechanism
Right.
of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're basically sending ultrasound waves through the water, and that disrupts the buoyancy of the cells. So the cyanobacteria cells, a lot of them can regulate their own buoyancy, so they move up to the surface during the day to take advantage of that sunlight, and then they can move down into deeper waters later. So if you disrupt that, they can't get the sunlight that they need.
So the ultrasound is disrupting their ability to control their buoyancy.
Yes.
That's really fascinating. These feel like really interesting solutions, but also maybe expensive solutions to this issue versus being able to address the contributors to the problem in the first place. So, but that's really interesting and also maybe heartening to know that there are some solutions there. What are your thoughts on the role of industry in terms of contributing and potentially reversing this issue?
As far as industry and agriculture, they can use, as far as agriculture, using less fertilizer, using best management practices to help reduce the amount of nutrients entering our waterways. Basically, any practice that can reduce those nutrients getting into our waterways is going to help protect the water quality.
As you said, this issue has been studied for only 5 years, roughly, in Colorado. So obviously there's a lot of new information that's coming out. Where would you like to see us, maybe in 5 years or 10 years on this issue in Colorado?
Goodness, that's a big question. Well, in an ideal world, if we can all just keep working together to help reduce the amount of nutrients entering our waterways, to help reduce these blooms. That's the ultimate goal, is to reduce the number of toxic algae blooms. As I said before, this is a natural occurrence, so they're never going to be completely eradicated. But if we can help to reduce the frequency and the duration of these blooms, I think that would be a great goal.
And this is partially just a selfish question, but let's say I'm someone who is looking for, a freshwater source, and I'm maybe looking for something that's off the beaten path, or maybe just want to do some exploring. Are there certain things I can look for geographically that would be indicators of this is probably a place that's going to be good, that won't have these blooms. Just looking for a place maybe to swim, maybe to take a paddleboard out. Are there certain geographical features that I can look for that are indicators of this?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, these can occur statewide, but we definitely see much less of an occurrence in high alpine lakes. You, of course, want to check and make sure that things like swimming, paddleboarding are allowed in the area that you want to go to before you go. And even on the Front Range, we have a plethora of wonderful state parks and all kinds of areas you can go, and really just check the dashboard before you head out. You can call water body managers before you head out, just to see if there's been any bloom reports. But yeah, the higher altitude ones, we definitely see fewer of these blooms.
I had that assumption, but maybe it's just because I've seen fewer of them at higher altitudes, and obviously because it's colder at higher altitudes. So it makes sense that you want to get them as much, but also pretty sunny up there. So anything else you want to share with the public on this topic before we close out?
Just in closing, I know we've already talked about it, but just making sure that everybody is algae aware, and look at the water before you get in, before you let your kids go in the water or your pets. Look for those telltale signs, that paint-like substance on the surface of the water, those bright green, turquoise colors. When in doubt, stay out. And just, we encourage everybody to do their own part in helping to reduce the nutrient impact to our waterways by picking up pet waste and fertilizing responsibly.
Avoid it and appreciate the freshwater sources that you can enjoy. Well, thank you so much for having this conversation and for advising the public on this topic. And I really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on here. I'm happy to talk about it.
Great. Thank you. If you found today's episode insightful, please share the episode with friends and family. Special thanks to John Michael from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment for coordinating this interview today. The music in today's episode is Siesta by Ixon and is a part of the Tell Your Story project, a library of free music for content creators. Go to ikson.com to explore the full catalog.